even a devout Muslim according to the Quran. Alexander the Great is as pagan as a pagan could possibly be. He's a devout Muslim in the Quran. What?
Okay, so Daniel Hikikichu, or the Muslim skeptic, debated David Wood on the Quran and the Bible, and David Wood keeps bringing up, or he brought up the idea that Dhul-Qarnayn is Alexander the Great in the Quran. Now, here I'm going to go on record and say, yes, I agree with David Wood. Alexander the Great, or Dhul-Qarnayn is Alexander the Great. I did heavy research, and the only conclusion I could draw is that Alexander the Great is, or Dhul-Qarnayn is Alexander the Great. I don't, like, historically, I don't see any way around this. And Tafsir al-Razi says the same thing. Tafsir Jalaluddin also says the same thing. So even classical Muslim scholars say that Dhul-Qarnayn is Alexander the Great. Now, is this a threat to the validity of Islam? No, it isn't, because I'm going to go. I'm going to show from Jewish. I'm going to show from a Jewish website called JewishHistory.org that there is a reason to believe that Dhul-Qarnayn was a believer in God, in the God of the Jews. It says, reading from this website, JewishHistory.org, Alexander the Great, it says, nevertheless, the Greeks believed that God existed, which is very important because it will help explain one reason why Alexander was able to tolerate the Jewish religion. Whereas many of the Persian empires were not. Aristotle knew that all the stories of the gods, from Apollo to Zeus, were made up. Alexander, as Aristotle's student, also believed that. Thanks to Aristotle, therefore, the ideas of the Jews were much more acceptable to Alexander. Further up, it says, Alexander was not a pagan because Aristotle was not a pagan. Aristotle's concept of God was that a creator exists. The Greek philosophers referred to God as the first cause. It was another way of unburdening themselves of conscience, except now with the stamp of belief in God. So, because Aristotle was not a pagan, Alexander the Great was not a pagan either. Like both Aristotle and Alexander the Great believed in the concept of one God, or monotheism. And then it says the ideas of the Jews were much more acceptable to Alexander. So Alexander the Great, according to, JewishHistory.org, bringing, Jewish history to life, they say that Alexander the Great was not a pagan and believed in one God. Josephus himself said that, Josephus was a first century historian. He writes that Alexander the Great was also a believer in the God of the Jews. So I'm trying to see if there's any references. So there's no, I don't see any references here, but I'm sure, if you do a little bit of digging, you can find the references to what, this website, JewishHistory.org, is talking about. So, while it's true that Dhul-Qarnayn is Alexander the Great, this is not a threat to the validity of Islam or the Quran, because Alexander the Great believed in the God of the Jews. So, like he was a monotheist. So, there's some history behind, the whole Gog and Magog story, with Alexander the Great building a wall against Gog and Magog. That is found in the writings of Josephus, etc. So there's some historical core to this story, and then there's also historical sites where the gates of Alexander, that they're historical sites where it's believed that these are the gates of Alexander to keep out Gog and Magog, etc. So my point is that David Wood is lying, or he's ignorant, or I don't know. With David Wood, there's only two options, right? It's either he's ignorant, or he's lying, or it's like he's both ignorant and lying. So there's only like three options when there's only three options when he's talking, right? He's either lying, or he just doesn't know, he's ignorant, or he's both ignorant and lying at the same time to his audience. Dhul-Qarnayn, yes, I agree with him that Dhul-Qarnayn is Alexander the Great. I don't see any way around that historically. At least historically, I don't see any way around it. but that's not. And again, classical Muslim scholars like Razi, Jalalain also agreed that Dhul-Qarnayn was. If you read their tafsir on the Quran 18, they identified Dhul-Qarnayn as Alexander the Great. So this is not a modern Muslim view. This is a classical Muslim view by Razi, even Ibn Ishaq. If you read Ibn Ishaq's book, he even identifies Dhul-Qarnayn as Alexander the Great. Or he says some Muslims, some very early Muslims believe that, or early Muslims believe that Dhul-Qarnayn was Alexander the Great. But anyways, regardless, this is not a threat to the validity of Islam, as David Wood claims, because we know that according to Josephus, he documents Alexander's meeting with the Jews, and according to Josephus, Alexander the Great respected the God of the Jews. He believed in the God of the Jews. So, like, even if you want to claim, well, Alexander the Great historically was a pagan, and he worshipped the Greek gods, etc. It's possible, and this is just my theory, is that it's possible that Alexander the Great may have started off as a pagan. He may have started off believing in the Greek gods, but as time went on, he later became a believer in God, the God of the Jews. So, history documents the earlier part of his beliefs and not the later part, where he went from paganism to monotheism, believing in one God. And that in the Quran is talking about the later part of his life instead of the earlier parts of his life. So the whole Dhul-Qarnayn and story with Gog and Magog comes, it's a later story of Alexander the Great. It's not, in his earlier years. It's like in his later years that he encountered the people of Gog and Magog that's found in the Bible, etc. So, but regardless, the point is that Alexander the Great was a believer in the God of the Jews, according to historical accounts, like Josephus' account. And the Quran is talking about Alexander the Great's a later part or a later stage in Alexander the Great's life where he believed in the God of the Jews. So that's what the Quran is referring to, the part of Dhul-Qarnayn being a monotheist and a believer in God. But regardless, the Quran is not in error here. The only person who is in error is David Wood, because he just doesn't know how to do proper research on anything, whether it comes to the Bible or the Quran or Islam or the New Testament. Like, David Wood doesn't know how to do research. It's either that or he's like willfully lying. It's like one of those two, right? So like, any way you cut it, the Quran is not in error here, because there's history to that story, just like there's history to the seven sleepers of the cave, because there are historical sites claiming to be the cave of the seven sleepers. There are historical sites claiming that it's the gates of Alexander, it's the gates of Alexander, etc. And according to that website I just cited right here, JewishHistory.org, they do say that Alexander the Great was a believer in the God of the Jews. You see, so like, I again, like, go to this website, JewishHistory.org, where they say, right here, it says Alexander was not a pagan because Aristotle himself was not a pagan. But regardless, the Quran is not in error. The only person who's in error is David Wood, because he just doesn't care about the truth. He just wants to, dramatize, or he just wants to criticize the Quran without doing proper research, without doing proper objective research, because we all know David Wood loves drama. He loves controversy. He loves causing controversy. He loves causing drama, and he loves attention seeking, which he does 24/7. So this is just my brief 2 cents on this whole Dhul-Qarnayn and Alexander the Great subject. Stay tuned. More videos coming up ahead.